Before addiction leaves the party, addiction offers you 20 bucks and gives that to you as a parting gift. So you say, wow, this guy is awesome. He not only comes to the party, enjoys the time, is a nice guest, but he actually gave me something in return or to help me with cleanup costs or with gas or whatever the case might be. Now, what you don't know is that addiction has stolen your wallet. What's going on, Renaissance Lifers? Welcome back to Renaissance Life TV, where we take life to a whole new level. I'm your host Lee, and today we're talking about how to overcome any addiction. Now, this is something we don't really talk about all that often, but it is a really important topic because it's something that many people deal with. So here's what you can expect out of this video. I'm going to assume that you know what an addiction is. So I'm not going to really spend a lot of time defining or going into a bunch of theory about what an addiction is. But what I am going to do is I'm going to hit on several tips, tools, resources, and things you need to know if you plan on beating addiction. So this really does apply to any type of addiction, whether it's alcoholism, drug abuse, pornography, or any of the other isms that are out there. Okay, so let's jump right into it. What's the big deal anyway? For those who maybe are not dealing with an addiction or don't know whether or not they have an addiction, I think the first big thing that I would say here is to recognize an addiction for what it is. As I was thinking about this over the last week or so, something really came to me, and that is that addiction is a thief. So it's not only the type of thief that steals your money, your time, your resources, your energy, it also ends up being the type of thief that steals your joy, your self-control, and your overall happiness in being a human being. The really insidious thing about an addiction is that it's not the type of thief that's gonna come in and break in your front door. It's not even gonna break in your back door. It's the subtle type of thief, the type that you don't even know is stealing from you. So this is kind of how I picture it in my mind. Addiction is that person who comes to your party, and over the course of the party, you get to know this person a little bit more. Before addiction leaves the party, addiction offers you 20 bucks and gives that to you as a parting gift. So you say, wow, this guy is awesome. He not only comes to the party, enjoys the time, is a nice guest, but he actually gave me something in return in gratitude or to help me with cleanup costs or with gas or whatever the case might be. Now, what you don't know is that addiction has stolen your wallet, and he actually took $100 out of your wallet and gave you $20 back in return. So you feel like he was actually giving you something, but he was actually only giving you back a little bit of what you already had to begin with. What he gave you was already yours. I don't know if you really get that image, but that's what's really insidious about an addiction, is that it gives you a little and it takes a lot. There's that kind of dichotomy. And if you're more interested in that, go ahead and research more about the cycle of addiction and what keeps drawing people back to an addiction. So, having laid that out and setting the groundwork that we know that addiction is a thief and addiction is insidious, how do you beat it? And that's what this video is going to be about. So the first step in beating any addiction is to find out what the root cause is. I think so much time is wasted on focusing on the actual addiction and giving more power to the addiction that we fail to focus on what the actual source of the addiction is. What is causing you to go to that addiction or resort to that action or unhealthy behavior? There's something that's the root cause, whether that's grief, depression, anxiety, untreated trauma. Those are the sorts of things that lead to either positive coping mechanisms or negative coping mechanisms. And a lot of times our negative coping mechanisms are the ones that end up turning into addictions. This can also come from unresolved stress. And I think the biggest step that's often overlooked, beyond every other type of tool and resource, I think the biggest thing that you can do for yourself is to resolve the underlying issues. And how do you find out what the underlying issues are? A lot of that comes from self-reflection, introspection, and you can get a lot done that way. But I think that this is a place where finding a good counselor or therapist can really go a long way. Now, I'll be the first to say that, as with anything else, not every therapist or counselor is created equal. I know people who are touting themselves as counselors, as therapists, as marital counselors, for instance, and I wouldn't take advice from them even if it was free. I think it's really challenging to find a good person here, but getting recommendations, trying different people, not giving up till you find somebody who's really qualified and whose personality you gel with, who has good technique that works for you. But don't give up. If you don't find the right person, you can still make progress in finding out what the root causes are of your depression, anxiety, whatever the case might be, and actually making progress to remedying that. Because if you can remedy the source, the root cause, then you won't have to rely on something else to try to deal with it. So tip number 2 for overcoming any type of addiction is to seek accountability or support. So a lot of times we think about the old school AA clubs where people are going to go and say, "Hi, my name is Lee," and everybody says, "Hi, Lee," and that sort of thing. But nowadays we really do have so much technology at our fingertips. So there are online forums, there are groups, there are support groups, there are accountability groups. And accountability really does make a huge impact in overcoming an addiction, because the way addiction thrives is in darkness. The way addiction thrives is in silence, right? The shame that comes with an addiction causes you not to share what that addiction is or share what you're going through. So you just end up dealing with it by yourself. And having a lonely life or a lonely existence, even in one aspect of your life like the addiction, is an area that gets no light shined into it. And that really is something that will stunt your growth or your progress in overcoming the addiction. So one of the really big things about having accountability is that sharing what you're going through with other people who either are going through the same thing or have gone through the same thing and overcome that addiction, that really does take away the shame from the addiction. And once you can remove the shame and call addiction out for what it is, you can finally start dealing with it as it is. Not as this thing that you're hiding or speaking about abstractly or metaphorically or without actually telling people what's really going on. The other great thing about accountability and sharing with other people who are like-minded and supportive is that you'll find that you're not the only person who's in this situation, and you're not the only person who has been in this situation. And the really great thing is that you'll even find people who were in the same situation and are not in the situation anymore. So that gives you hope, and hope is really an important thing to have when you're going through an addiction, because what an addiction does is that it robs you of any hope, and it feels like you'll never get out of that situation. So having an accountability partner works really well here. Someone that you can check in with regularly, someone who will check on you and see how you're doing. Or if you're having a struggle, they can encourage you and support you. They know the right things to say, and they're also there to hold you accountable. When you don't do what you know you're supposed to do, you have somebody who's in on it, who actually knows what you're going through, that can tell you, here's what you need to do and here's where you need to go. You really need that, because willpower will really not go very far when it comes to an addiction, especially because the mind is a very powerful thing. We will trick ourselves into thinking we're doing the right thing, even though we know we're doing the wrong thing. So another thing is, I don't want you to get hung up on the addiction. You really have to understand that the addiction is not the problem. It's just the manifestation of a deeper problem. It's the symptom, if you will. So dealing with the addiction directly, a lot of times it's just the band-aid. You'll find yourself coming back to the same addiction, and that's why you have people relapsing or having to deal with the same addiction over and over and over again, because the root problem was never solved or resolved. So take your mind off the addiction, and this can be such a relief for people to take their mind off the weight of the addiction and actually just start dealing with their own lives, with their own goals, their own dreams, and trying to get their lives in order in general. We're going to talk about how to deal with the addiction itself, but first you want to start thinking about what is the core and the root of the issue. Tip number 3 for how to overcome any addiction is to find tools and resources. So tools and resources really do make it easier for you to be able to overcome the addiction. Now, overcoming any addiction is not an easy thing, but there are tools that will help you along the way and make it simpler or a smoother process. So if that addiction has to do with technology or pornography, then there are tools online that will help block certain sites, or that will simply notify an accountability partner. So these sorts of tools and resources can aid you in the process of overcoming the addiction and give you that measure or added barrier, or something that can also help give you a buffer, so that when you are weak, there's something else that's also helping you be stronger. Look for tools and resources online or in different groups or forums, in the various app stores. There are tools and resources for any type of addiction. If you're feeling an urge to indulge in the addiction, there are apps that will have positive, affirming messages about yourself. whatever the case might be, there's going to be an app or a resource or tools for that. You just got to seek it out. Tip number 4 for overcoming any addiction is to replace your idle time. Fill the time that you have that's idle. A lot of times we indulge in addictions or we develop negative habits that often turn into addictions when we're just idle. When we maybe don't have a job, or we're not active, or we're having a ton of time in isolation, we're not going out with friends, or we're not exercising, or whatever the case might be. So if you are already dealing with an addiction, find a new addiction, a positive addiction. Maybe that addiction is exercising or helping out at a community center, or getting involved with something else that will take up more of your time where you don't have time sitting idle. If you're just busier in general, you'll have less time to indulge in that addiction, and that will also help break the cycle of the addiction. Tip number 5 for overcoming any addiction really should probably be one of the first tips, but I have it as tip number 5. And what it is that you have to make a decision. I would say 70 to 90% of overcoming any addiction is mental. The decision is really what has to be made. A lot of times we think we make decisions about things, but really we've left ourselves an out. So making that decision may seem like an easy thing, but it really is one of the hardest parts. And the reason why I put this tip as number 5 and maybe not as number 1 is a lot of times the ability to make that mental decision hinges on overcoming whatever mental or psychological barriers or factors that we need to overcome in order to overcome that addiction. So if the psychological barrier is poor self-worth or depression, then you're not going to be able to make the mental decision to stop an addiction or to break free from an addiction, because your mind just isn't there. The mind has been weakened or is just dealing with something else that there's just no way that you're going to be able to make the decision to stop. You'll tell yourself that you'll stop many times, right? So that there's that constant reoccurring conversation that you'll never do this again, but the mind is not strengthened, it's not fortified. You still have the underlying issue, which doesn't allow you to be able to make that decision firmly. So make a decision and actually want to stop. Addiction is so ironic because in as much as it hurts us, a lot of times the addiction becomes the place of comfort. So sometimes it's hard to even make the decision to not want to be addicted, even though we know the negative effects, because it's just so comfortable. It's become our new normal. And that's another reason why it becomes so difficult. Tip number 6 for overcoming any addiction is to find something higher than yourself. Okay, now, I don't want to lose you here. Stay with me. But people who have a belief in a higher being or a higher power have a higher likelihood of being able to overcome an addiction. But for those of you who may not believe in God, this is really a powerful area that can help you make a lot of forward progress in overcoming an addiction, especially one that has gripped your life. Part of that is there is power outside of yourself. Addiction can make us so weak. So being able to rely on another power for strength to be able to overcome really does go a long way. So this is something that I would challenge you. If you don't believe in God, or you don't have a belief system, I would say not in any hoo-ha type of way or trying to get you to convert to anything, but you really have nothing to lose in this regard. And you may just find that addiction had a weird and funny way of drawing you and pulling you to a higher power and a higher source outside of yourself and beyond yourself that you didn't even know existed. Okay, so those are my 6 tips for how to overcome any addiction. I really do hope that this has helped you. And if you're dealing with an addiction right now that has gripped your life, don't give up hope, be encouraged, and know that there is light at the end of the tunnel, and that you will overcome and that you can overcome it. Know that addiction does not have to last forever, and there is a way out. So I want to ask you to do one more thing here. If you've reached this point in the video and you found anything helpful in this video, I want you to share this video on your social media, whether it's Facebook or YouTube or Twitter or whatever the case might be, and share it so that this video can reach someone out there who's dealing with addiction today. This can be a resource or an encouragement for them to get to where they need to get to and get their lives back. If you like this content, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. It really does help the channel grow. And I will see you next time on Renaissance Life TV. Cheers.